Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for inviting me to speak on the topic of crime sensing with big data, potentials and limitations of using big data for crime estimation. My name is Benjamin Ang. I'm the head of Cyber and Homeland Defense at the Center of Excellence for National Security. We are a policy research think tank based in the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies in the Nanyang Technological University of Singapore. Our Cyber and Homeland Defense program researches policy issues around cyber, which includes threats and cyber conflicts, and building a cyber ecosystem. We also look at international rule of law in cyber norms of behavior and cyber confidence building measures between states. We look at critical infrastructure laws to build cyber resilience, especially for our smart city. We look at science and technology regulation for ambient technology, autonomous technology, and disruptive technologies. And we are looking most relevant to today's discussion, law enforcement use of artificial intelligence and machine learning to fight cybercrime. We also look at communications, information operations, behavioral targeting, and what is commonly called fake news. So let's look at an example of a city which is already using big data for crime sensing. If you see this huge wall of computer screens, it's actually being lit up not only with reports of calls, but also with tracking breaking news stories, and there are surveillance cameras that are monitoring the streets so that real-time crime data can come in and real-time police deployments can go out. This high-tech command center is the Los Angeles Police Department Real-Time Analysis Critical Response, or RACR division in Los Angeles. And they are making use of big data. But first, let's talk about big data. What exactly is big data and how is big data collected? Big data is the ability to harness information in new ways to produce useful insights or goods and services of significant value. And this is not just regular data that's being collected, but it's big data which has volume, it means it's very large amounts. There's a variety, it's coming in different forms, and it has velocity. The content of the data is constantly changing. This distinguishes it from normal individual pieces of small data that we are normally used to handling. And how is this big data collected? Some of it comes from law enforcement databases, whether it's your arrest database or your surveillance database. Could be third-party records coming from the commercial sector. It could be biometric or facial recognition software built into the cameras that can actually recognize people by their faces. It could be GPS location on smartphones, so you know the location of where people have been. And social media posts, what they have put on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. Purchase data, what they have used their credit card or cashless payments to buy. Phone records, and phone records include phone call metadata because the ISPs, phone companies, and all have the ability to store, access, analyze, and share the metadata of phone calls, which reveals the phone numbers that have been called and from any particular phone. Also the location and time of every call, text, or email. And for many cities now, they have automatic license plate readers that record the location of the cars, and electronic toll collection systems that record where each time a car passes under a particular toll bridge. And the speed cameras also record travel time. So this is a photograph from Singapore, where electronic road pricing systems basically cover the entire central business district. Any vehicle entering Singapore's central business district will be recorded automatically by the electronic road pricing or ERP system. And for cities like Singapore, which have the smart city ambition or smart nation ambition, we have things like smart lampposts. And our smart lampposts can do many things. They can potentially be used to guide autonomous vehicles, driverless cars. It can be used to sense the environment. It can be used to track people on personal mobility devices or e-scooters. And it could also be used for facial detection, because artificial intelligence can be used to determine who is actually walking past a lamppost at any time of day. This, of course, will come back and have certain impacts that we look at later. So, as I'm speaking from Singapore, let me share with you the current laws and regulations applicable to big data in Singapore. Firstly, personal data is protected under our Personal Data Protection Act 2012. This was enacted in 2012, and it covers personal data, which is defined as data about an individual who can be identified from that data. To give examples, this could include the person's name, the National Registration Identity Card or NRIC number, because every Singaporean has an identity card, the phone number or email, or even the face from a picture. So all of these are personal data which can be used to identify any individual. So this personal data is protected in the sense that any organization can only collect this data or use this data or disclose this data, sharing it with other organizations with the individual's knowledge and consent, with some exceptions. Now, what are the exceptions? The PDPA does not apply to data collected by individuals, employees, or any public agency. That means that law enforcement or any national security agency or any government agency can collect personal data without seeking consent. This is actually covered under our Personal Data Protection Act, or should I say it is especially not covered by the Personal Data Protection Act. The Personal Data Protection Act also does not override any other act. So because of the Personal Data Protection Act exception for public agencies, this means that electronic road pricing or license plate recognition systems or smart lampposts do not have to comply with the Personal Data Protection Act because they are owned by public agencies. We'll now look at criminal law, and our criminal law was inherited from the English because we were a British colony. And in 1870, the Penal Code, which is a copy of the original code enacted in India, became the law of criminal law of Singapore and continues to be the primary source of criminal law legislation. We also have the common law concept that two elements are required to establish guilt. One is the actus reus, which is the action or conduct, which is an element of the crime, and the mens rea, the intention or knowledge of wrongdoing that constitute part of a crime. Therefore, in order to establish guilt for a crime, it must not only have been thought of, but there must be an action or conduct, which could include an attempt or a conspiracy, which is going to be the actus reus part of the crime. This will be relevant when we are looking at the question of predictive policing and the concept of whether you can arrest somebody for a crime before the crime is committed. Let's look at the first Criminal Procedure Code next of Singapore. And it says that an arrest may be made without warrant under Section 64 if a person under 64(1)(a) is reasonably suspected of having been involved in an arrestable offense. Arrestable offenses are the more serious offenses, including offenses to the person and to property. So all credible information has been received. The important phrases here are reasonably suspected and credible information. Now, these are terms which have been defined in many cases in Singapore law and usually go to look at the circumstances that the person was found in or the evidence that came from tip-offs or informants. So the police may arrest unknown suspects who are engaged in observable suspicious activities, and this has traditionally been based on what is called small data, what you see the suspect doing, where the suspect was doing it, for example, he was in an alley, and when he was doing it, for example, at night. Further in the same section, an arrest may be made without warrant under Section 64(1)(k) if the person is known to be planning to commit an arrestable offense. So if you have evidence that the person is planning to commit the offense, and it appears to the police officer the offense cannot otherwise be prevented, then he or she can be arrested without a warrant. So this is also going to be relevant when we're talking about using big data to predict crimes before they are committed. So let us look now at crime analysis. And if you see these two men taking a selfie, the meaning will become relevant in the next slide. So one of the ways in which big data can be used by law enforcement is in crime analysis. And there are success stories that already have been published. For example, there was a case where there was a gang-related shooting, and the witnesses had seen that there were motor vehicles involved, and there were two known gangs that were fighting. So the analyst used their social network information, scanning the social networks, to identify who might have killed the victim and what gang connections they had. Because these gang members had very proudly posted their gang affiliations on their social media. The police then went to tie in whichever gang associate actually owned the vehicle that matched what the witnesses had seen leaving the scene of the shooting. By linking social media analysis with eyewitness accounts, they were able to catch the killer. There's also published accounts of police officers watching posts and videos uploaded to YouTube by gangs, where gang members describe their criminal activities and even threaten other gangsters. So police have used evidence of crimes posted online, including offenders who post photos of crime scenes and brag that they have committed the crimes. So if you see the actual robber committing a crime and taking a selfie at the crime scene, well, that's available on social media, and police are using that to link the suspect to the crime scene and to the crime. That is the success story of ongoing crime analysis. But what about crime prediction? Crime prediction is a totally different idea where we're talking about not analyzing crimes that have been committed, not talking about investigating, but we're talking now about predicting crimes before they actually happen. And there have been success stories. The Predpol system in Kent in the United Kingdom predicted an 8.5% of street crime in the areas that they were marked out. In fact, the police officer said in the first area he visited, they found a carving knife lying in the road. That is quite serious. So during a 4-month trial in the UK, they had an 8.5% rate of predicting street crime compared to normal human analysts who scored 5%. Over in the USA, in the foothill area of Los Angeles, in late 2011, the use of predictive policing is credited with reducing property crimes by 12%. If you look at the map, there are many areas in Los Angeles where it's actually gone up on average, whereas foothill has actually gone down. Back in the UK, in Trafford, which is in Manchester, in northwest England, they use the information to take quite simple actions. For example, have more police cars drive through the high-risk areas. And apparently, this has helped to reduce burglaries by 26.6% in the year to May 2011. So these are all success stories of how crime was predicted and prevented. Because the big data is being used to analyze the various factors about the environment, about previous crimes, about the many other factors, and used to predict which area of a town or city may have more crime And at that point in time, with the information, police are then able to focus on these particular parts of the city. So in this report, which was published in The Independent, the analysts found that in the UK, forces have found that it's about 10 times more likely to predict the location of future crime than random beat policing. Of course, all police forces have the problem of not enough manpower to cover the entire cities that they are assigned to. So this helps the police to focus on the specific areas which are higher risk. And if you look at this map, it will show you the different crime types at different parts of the city, and the police can focus on these particular areas, and accordingly, it is 10 times more likely to predict where the crime might happen. So some of the ways in which crime has been reduced usually involve the police working with local communities. The officers may go into the community to talk to the locals or report problems like broken lights or unsecured properties, which might encourage crime. These are positive examples. And specifically in Kansas City in the USA, the police department's Kansas City No Violence Alliance, or KC Nova, has reached out to potential reoffenders and helped them to find better housing and jobs. As a result, because they have better housing and jobs, they are less likely to commit crimes, and this in theory could have reduced homicides by 20%. Not only that, some of these potential reoffenders were able to lead the police to identify 60 criminal enterprises. So not only was crime reduced, but some of the predicted suspects actually helped the community to catch other criminals. So when this information is used to give law enforcement agencies information that can help humanitarian works and employment training or better housing and jobs, this results in a better outcome, that crime actually gets reduced. Of course, there are also situations where the information was not used correctly, and I'll be discussing that later on. But first, let's be looking at these success stories. We also find that big data can potentially reduce bias, because if big data is used to target suspects instead of the police officer's personal bias, it is hoped that they can reduce the cases of racial bias or just bias against particular neighborhoods. In fact, if the police use big data to scan any particular individual or vehicle, then the suspicion could be disproved. You might find that a person has stopped their car outside a bank, but if you scan by big data, they may legitimately be there to make a banking transaction. So the ideal would be that police officers with big data access should be required to use it instead of using their hunch. The problem with many cases which is found in the US, when police officers use their hunch, there's personal bias, which means that minorities get targeted more, and that creates a bad relationship between the police and the community. So instead of using their hunch, which may be biased, they only stop people. If they only stop people who are found suspicious because of big data, this can potentially help the community. Now we come to the limitations and risks of using big data for law enforcement. And this is a familiar movie based on a book, a 1956 science fiction short story, Minority Report, by the author Philip K. Dick. And this is very often cited as one of the worst case scenarios of using big data or artificial intelligence to predict crime. Because in the science fiction story, the author imagined a world where there was a pre-crime police division that can predict all crime before it happens. And in theory, officers would arrest suspects before there was any actual public harm. So without spoiling the ending of the movie, lead character played here by Tom Cruise was one of these police officers who was catching people before they committed crimes based on the pre-crime report. And the story in the movie takes place when a pre-crime report comes out about him, that he is predicted to be committing a murder in the near future. And basically now he has to prove that he is not going to commit a murder. So you can understand how complicated that would be. And this is usually cited as the nightmare scenario where innocent people are being accused of crimes they have not committed yet and might never commit. So why could this happen? There basically is the risk of wrong decisions, because wrong data can give biased decisions. The misuse and overuse of data can amplify a bias. If the software is looking at arrest reports, then it creates a vicious cycle, because where neighborhoods have more arrests and the police start paying more attention to the neighborhood, they will probably catch more of minor offenses being committed, and then there'll be more arrests. And then that area will be predicted to have more crime. And then the police will be there again, and then they'll carry on more arrests. And you can see this goes on and on. And the report system can be biased in favor of rich neighborhoods, because rich neighborhoods tend to report crime very quickly, whereas poor neighborhoods who suffer from a lot of crime may not bother to report because of a bad relationship with police. Secondly, the judges could give too much reliance in the accuracy of crime prediction tools. This is actually a danger if the judges give up their discretion and rely too much on the accuracy of crime prediction tools, thinking that the crime prediction tools are accurate when actually the tools are not. So judges still have to rely on their own judgment. Thirdly, many of these are based on commercial data, which can make inaccurate links of crime to unrelated factors like race. So the problem with commercial data is that it is not intended when it was gathered to be used for crime. The burden of proof in crime is beyond reasonable doubt, but there's no such requirement when collecting personal data under commercial use. So the accuracy of commercial data is nowhere near what is required in criminal prosecution. And if there is a correlation, for example, that many crimes are found to be committed by people of a certain minority race, someone who does not understand the difference between correlation and causation may think that people of that minority race are more likely to commit crimes, whereas actually it's the other way around. So inaccuracy has a low impact in commercial sales. For example, if you are on the Amazon.com website and you are recommended the wrong book to purchase, that's okay. The impact is very small. But in a criminal arrest, if the wrong person is recommended for arrest or the wrong sentence is recommended, this is going to create a great impact on the individual. Finally, there are false positives. For example, if you're looking at social media and there are certain subcultures where people like to sing songs with lyrics about committing crime or violence, when actually there's no intention to actually do these things, it's just what they sing about, then you could actually have a false positive and think that the person is a criminal when actually they're just enjoying their songs. So let's talk about examples of bad data. There are some gang lists that have been found to be inaccurate, so the people on the list are actually not gangsters. Some arrest reports can be inaccurate or erroneous, and if the inaccurate data is put into the big data, you get inaccurate results. For example, the US FBI files reportedly contain hundreds of thousands of errors. Of course, I've also mentioned that commercial records just are inaccurate because they are not collected for the purpose of crime prevention and result in possibly false positives. There is a danger of what is called broken windows policing. Broken windows policing focuses on trying to maintain order by enforcing arrests for minor offenses, which is supposedly would create an environment where larger crimes would not be committed. But broken windows policing creates a selection bias, because if you use broken windows policing in a neighborhood, you will end up with more arrest figures, which makes the area look more crime ridden. And if the area looks more crime ridden, then the police are more likely to be there, which means they are more likely to observe new minor crimes that confirm the prediction, and this creates a bias that confirms itself. The algorithms themselves have risks because the objective may not be clear to the coder, and the algorithms may reflect the biases of the coders. Also, the coders may not have considered negative social effects of the algorithms that they develop. These are all because the coders, programmers, are human after all, and the software is not something that exists by itself. On the user end, people who are using it, whether from law enforcement or whether from the judiciary, may wrongly assume that the algorithms are objective because they are not subjective, or rather that they are objective because they are mathematical. This is a wrong assumption. Algorithms can be biased. Finally, this is because algorithms are often black boxes. By a black box, it means that the code cannot be analyzed, either because it is too complex or because of intellectual property reasons that they are not allowed to be analyzed. And if you do not analyze how the algorithm makes its decision, then it is not possible to tell whether the algorithm is actually making the correct decision or not. After all, these decisions are based on measurements, but how do we know what to measure? If the wrong thing is being measured, then what is being not measured, which could actually have a meaningful effect, will be skewed. And if we do not know how the algorithm makes a judgment, how does one appeal against an algorithmic judgment? Because the algorithm cannot write a grounds of decision to be appealed against. So it is very important for judges still to exercise their discretion and their judgment. A definite example is the use of the sentencing algorithm Compass, which is used in the USA to help judges to determine what sentence to give to offenders based on the risk score of committing future crimes. But journalists from ProPublica obtained the risk scores for more than 7,000 people who were arrested in Florida over 2 years, and they found that the sentencing algorithm was remarkably unreliable in predicting who was likely to commit a violent crime in future. Only 20% actually did so. In fact, the system labeled black defendants twice as much as white defendants to be future criminals. So this was a great scandal. And even after this, the Compass programmers said that the algorithm cannot be examined because of intellectual property and trade secret reasons. To add on top of this, there are risks of social issues. It has been found that surveillance creates anxiety because when people believe that they are being watched all the time, they will feel more anxious. This affects how the society develops. There are also privacy concerns because the privacy of individuals is not being protected when they are being monitored all the time. And these have also been abused by individual officers who had control over the systems. For example, police officers who use the surveillance systems to track ex-girlfriends. There are cybersecurity concerns because this data can be hacked into either from externally or from inside. And if there's over-reliance on the algorithm instead of engaging the community, that actually reduces the effectiveness of the police engaging the community. It's definitely bad to have a false sense of security or over-reliance on the system. And finally, I'll put this there, there's also the fear of abuse by authoritarian governments. So the Australian Strategy Policy Institute actually has several papers on the use of big data in China. And they have raised the concerns that China, being an authoritarian society, government would have used this surveillance and big data to clamp down on dissent. So let's talk about social issues and the fears. Remember, I mentioned that in Singapore we have smart lampposts that can conduct sensing and can recognize faces, catch PD, e-scooter or personal mobility device (PMD) users. So this was first announced in the mainstream media as a very good thing, a positive step, because it would help law enforcement. However, very quickly, the alternative media online started to raise concerns that Singapore will become a police state where everybody is being watched. And all over social media, readers were voicing their concerns. For example, this is not a smart lamppost, this is a lamppost with CCTV and data capture. It is tightening the control of privacy. And basically, it is the story that the government is trying to control everybody. So you can see that if there is a opposition to such ideas, it can actually cause a friction between the law enforcement authorities and the population. So it's very important when implementing these to have good policies of communication and transparency with the people so that they do not have the wrong impression, or maybe there is the right impression that also has to be managed. So what are some of the steps that can be taken? We need to look at data protection. The data protection means that the data is collected only for law enforcement purposes, and the collected information is being protected from being stolen by external parties or even internal parties. For example, as I said, the police officers who use it to track ex-girlfriends. You should also have analysis protection, where the analysis protection ensures that the analysis results themselves are not hacked. Also, that there is checks against inaccuracy and checks against biases. And finally, action protection, that after the information has been gathered and the analysis has been made, then there should be policies to determine that it will not just result in more police stepping into a neighborhood and arresting more people, but balancing it with social service, helping the people in that neighborhood have better access to employment and housing. I'll focus on analysis protection. This covers some specific areas like managing who is authorized to use the data. And this is important because, again, it's human beings who are making the analysis based on the data, and they can actually tweak the data and make it inaccurate. And it's overseeing the algorithms. As I mentioned, the algorithms themselves may have biases, so they must be checked for bias. Information also needs to be prevented from leaking, and audits are good to check the accuracy of the algorithmic decision making, as was done in the case of the Compass system earlier. When it comes down to it, let's have a reality check. Criminals are already using data. And one study says that 80% of arrested burglars surveyed use social media updates to plan their burglaries. Basically, they were looking at who had gone on a long vacation and looked at the homes of these people, which are easily found on social media because of the GPS data and photos, and then planning which houses would be empty and which they could rob. So if criminals are already using data, it's very important then for us on the good side not to be caught unaware, and that we can actually make use of data, especially big data, to improve law enforcement and criminal justice. I would conclude by saying that big data has many benefits for crime analysis and crime prevention. The big data also has many risks if used without proper understanding of its limitations, such as the bias and the inaccuracy. Therefore, policies must be set up to regulate the use of big data in crime analysis and prevention so that there's a better understanding and there is a better control of how it is used. My references are all available in the slides. These slides will be made available to you as well. Please follow me on Twitter at Benjamin Ang for more updates on this and different other areas of cyber and legal technology. Thank you very much. I wish you a good rest of the conference.